Здравствуйте, дорогие друзья! У нас специально для комиксбума очередная встреча, очередное интервью. На этот раз с британским художником, карикатуристом Томом Голдом, который посетил Москву. Мы решили встретиться с Томом и задать ему несколько вопросов. Hi, Tom.
Hello.
It's nice to meet you. And we know that it's not your first visit to Russia, and we also know that it's a traditional British tradition, British habit to start conversation with the weather talk.
Right, yes.
So how do you like our winter, which this year I think started too late, probably in August?
Right, yes. Well, it's nice to be here in the snow. It's not snowy in London, so arriving in the snow seemed pretty exciting.
And all this Christmas mood, you know?
Yeah, it's great.
Tom, 3 of your books, which are laid on our table, were published in Russia so far.
Yes.
And we also know that the most of your work are done for the newspapers, magazines, illustrations of any kind. And I just wanted to ask you, what is the main differences between working on your so-called big books and cartoons? Well, except for the time which you spent, of course.
Well, the time is a difference, and they're completely different things. I draw them in the same way. The actual act of drawing is exactly the same, but the act of coming up with ideas and making stories is completely different. For the short cartoons, I feel it just has to be a little moment, a little idea, a little joke, and I don't have to worry about saying too much about the world or expressing too much. It's just about a moment and giving people an interesting moment, an idea. With the longer books, I feel if I'm expecting someone to buy the book and take it and look through it, it needs to have something a bit more. And that's the bit I find very difficult about writing the longer books, is coming up with stories which feel worthwhile, feel worth telling. And that's why both of those books took me quite a long time to make, because a lot of that was me searching for an idea and searching for a story which felt worthwhile.
And how do you come up with the ideas for your short cartoons? Well, do you have some notebook where you just write the idea whenever it comes to your head for the joke, and how does it work?
Well, I do. I have notebooks and files on my computer and doodles and sketches, and I have lots of ideas which come to me. But the thing that really helps with the cartoons for The Guardian is knowing there's a deadline. Is it has to be the cartoon.
You do it quickly, right? For
yes,
The Guardian.
yeah. They tell me the general theme for the cartoon on a Tuesday, and I have to have it finished by Wednesday or Thursday. So it's 1 or maybe 1.5 days. And that's good for focusing my mind and making me pick an idea and go for it. So deadlines are important things for me.
Actually, that's what I wanted to ask you about the topics for your cartoons. So they're chosen by the editors of The Guardian, right?
Yes, but they can give me a theme, and I can take the theme and go somewhere strange with it. They might give me a very simple theme like Jane Austen or murder mysteries, and then I can take that into whatever crazy world I want, as long as it's slightly connected. And they're very good at leaving me to do my own thing with that cartoon. The newspaper never asks me to change things.
But do you consider your newspaper and magazine work just like a routine job? Whenever maybe your books are like a passion project for you?
A little, but these cartoons, drawing these cartoons for The Guardian is one of my favourite things to do in the week. And it really is an enjoyable thing and something I feel quite comfortable doing. And it matters as much to me as the longer cartoons, but the books end up being more of a passion project because they take, might take 2 years to make a book, so it becomes, it's more work. Whereas these cartoons, every 3 years I have a stack of cartoons and then I can make a book, and it's an easier process.
And how much do you spend for one weekly cartoon for the garden? A day or?
Well, it depends how long the idea takes, because the drawing will only take 2 or 3 hours. But coming up with the idea, some days I have a great week when I have an idea in 5 minutes. And some days I spend a whole afternoon scratching my head and drinking coffee and thinking. And in the end, I haven't come up with anything. But the great thing about a deadline is it forces you to not look for the perfect idea, but to just, whatever works, you have to make it work. And sometimes I do something and I think, oh dear, that wasn't a very good one. But then later, when you look back, you think, oh yes, that was quite good. I just didn't, at the time, I was too caught up in it to notice.
You know, the one difference I've noticed, that as you said, for your strips, for the cartoons, for the weekly cartoons, you just have to make it work. You just have to make people laugh, actually. So there's always a joke as a concept of a cartoon, but in your major books, they have jokes as well, but they're filled with loneliness, mostly, and melancholy, I'd say.
Yes.
Is it a part of, are they more personal, I'd say?
Yes, I think they are. It would be interesting to try to write a long book which was just full of jokes, but I wouldn't know how to do that. I wouldn't be interested. I don't think I could make a book that I would find interesting which was just full of silly jokes, if it was one long story. So I guess a lot of the comics I like have a mixture of humour and something else, and the something else which tends to appear in my work is this melancholy feeling, a sadness, and I don't know where that comes from. I guess I like art which is funny, but I also like art which has a melancholy about it.
Well, actually about the comics you like. Well, we all know, because we are representing the comic book website, first of all. And we of course all know that the British comic book school is one of the greatest in the world. Which comic books or which comic book authors do you like, or you did like back in childhood? Right.
Well, to go back to childhood, the things my first experience of comics was reading the Asterix books.
Oh yeah. Right.
They had them in my local library in Britain. The only comics they had were Asterix and Tintin. So that was where I began. And then slowly, as I grew up, I started reading, as a small boy, just any comics about wars, with soldiers shooting guns. That excited me. And that sort of led into reading 2000 AD. Which was a science fiction comic, which was, when I was a child, was or a young teenager, was I think one of its best periods. So I loved the artists in 2000 AD, and that some of those artists were making sci-fi stories for 2000 AD, but they were also working on more independent projects. So through 2000 AD, I started getting into independent comics in Britain, and then into the American comics like Dan Clow's work and Chris Ware, and I think probably it's those American comics which had the biggest influence on my work. Chris Ware, when I found his work, I was really influenced by, and also the Canadians like Chester Brown and Seth were an influence. And lastly, when I went to college, I went to study illustration, and in the library there I discovered a book by Edward Gorey, who's not a cartoonist as such, but he tells wonderful stories with words and pictures. And I think what inspired me about his work was this idea that you could use words and pictures to tell interesting stories, but they didn't always have to follow all the comics rules. You could pick and choose the things you wanted from those tools. and he had a big influence on the way I draw, and also on the design of the books. I love that Edward Gorey's books, as soon as you pick them up, you're starting to be in his world.
His dark world of black humor, sort of. Yeah.
Yes, but every book feels like every part of it came from him, which I like. So I try and do that with my books. That the atmosphere, the story begins when you see the cover, and then you're drawn into it.
Yeah. And have you thought maybe about working not on a single book, but like in maybe an ongoing series of comic books, a story with the with some continuity? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I have thought about that, and that's such a popular way of making comics.
Yes, it is.
Having characters who reappear and stories that go on, and I like many comics like that, but I can't seem to write like that. I can't make... When the story's finished, I've sort of lost the characters somehow. I can't imagine writing again about the Moon Cop from Moon Cop, or I suppose at the end of Goliath he's not around anymore. So, yeah, I don't know why I can't do that. I think it's maybe partly control. You can control a story in one book, but the idea of just sort of letting it go and following it, I haven't learned to do that.
I see. So about your newspaper cartoons, you know, throughout the Russian history, the Soviet and then Russian cartoon art was mostly about the politics.
Yes.
But the political satire, sort of. And you seem not to be interested in politics, I'd say. Is it right?
Yes. I mean, it's the same thing is true in Britain. If I tell people I'm a cartoonist for a newspaper, they assume I'm drawing nasty pictures of the Prime Minister. It's not that I'm not interested. I have a friend who's a political cartoonist, and he's always angry. Things make him angry, and he gets angry, and it makes him... The anger, it makes him energetic, and he makes this work inspired by his anger. But I think I have a different personality, and when I see bad things happening in politics, it makes me sad. And that's not an energetic way to be. And I don't know how to turn those things into work. So I've never... In my new book of cartoons, there are maybe 3 or 4 which are political, a little bit political, but it's not a major theme in my work.
Actually, Tom, we have a small present for you.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's a Soviet collection of cartoon art back from 1983.
Wow.
Yes, it is called this satirical magazine, which is called Pepper.
Okay.
Yes, and the collection of the cartoons by the Ukrainian cartoonists. So yeah, you can just...
Oh wow, that's lovely. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'll look forward to looking at the pictures.
About the realities of the Soviet life. Actually.
Okay, lovely printing too. I like it.
Yes.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And also, well, you're not interested in politics, but what you seem to be interested in is culture and literature in particular, because lots of your strips are about the writers, about the books.
Yeah.
They're great. And I wanted to ask you about the fiction literature, actually. What are your favorite writers?
Well,
classic or modern?
Well, I have lots of favorite writers. Recently I've been very inspired by George Saunders, who's an American short story writer. I think Moon Cop in some ways was inspired by his short stories, which are a little bit science fiction-y, but are mainly about life and real life and ordinary everyday problems. So I was inspired by his work recently. And in the past, I have all sorts of people really. I like Charles Dickens, the classics. I did about 3 cartoons for The Guardian about Jane Austen before I'd ever read one of her books. And the cartoons inspired me to read some of her books, which I loved. So sometimes I can make a cartoon based around the cultural idea of something, even if I haven't read it. But sometimes it inspires me to read new things.
And is there any chance for any Russian classical writers to be featured in your cartoons?
Well, in my new collection, which will be out next year, there is a War and Peace cartoon. There was a television series of War and Peace.
Famous. Made by BBC.
Yes, and there was that week they wanted me to do a cartoon about that. Although I hadn't read War and Peace, so I watched the television.
Me neither, actually.
And I asked a friend who'd read it, so I didn't make any terrible mistakes. But again, doing that cartoon inspired me to one day read the book.
You know the funny thing about War and Peace, that it's mandatory, it's obligatory for the school, for the students in school to read it. But there are 4 volumes in it.
Yeah.
4 volumes and like 2,000 pages long, or like 3,000 pages long. And I have managed to read only 3 of them, actually.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's better.
It was a challenge, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, Tom, I wanted to ask you about your style, of drawing. Well, it's very recognizable with all that hatchwork.
Yes.
It's like a sort of like a trademark of yours.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you to give an advice for the young artists, maybe, for the artists who want to start their career, how to find your own style and not to copy famous artists, how to find your trademark.
Yes. Well, it's a difficult thing to explain. The cross-hatching, I did copy from Edward Gorey. I loved that in his work, and I copied it. And there were other artists who I tried to copy from, and it didn't help at all. But something about that cross-hatching resonated with me, and I think it works for my work. But apart from that, I'd say I kind of found my style when I stopped trying to find a style. When I was at art school, I was always trying to make work which was, expressive and virtuoso and exciting. But when I got into writing comics, I was just so much more interested in trying to tell a story that a lot of the pieces of style kind of fell away, and I just used this simple way to try and tell the story. So I think style just comes out of work, and you just need to press on and make more work, and I think a style sort of comes together. It's not something you find, it's something that happens.
I see. Thanks for the advice for the young artists. Okay, thank you very much, Tom. We're really looking forward to meet you once again, maybe in Moscow or in St. Petersburg, or maybe in London even. So we wish you a great time, which you have left here in Russia. Thanks.
Thank you very much.